While I'm a cornul, dus na boil, dus na hefigig, dov shoe the tossy gallery. Jane Kinchdag will ver gohan glush so glushte mucha fa an crine hesho. Maar currently the stock an virus Creilacon few one or Tashid an Mo Kuhn. The meeting has been convened to consider the revised estimate for Vote 26, Education and Skills, which is referred to this committee by Dáil Éireann in pursuance of its constitutional function to consider the estimates. I would like to thank Minister Joe McHugh and his officials to the meeting. I would also like to thank the Department for their briefing document provided to the meeting. As the Minister is present, the officials will obviously speak to the Minister, maybe privately, but not in public session. That's the procedure. I would like to inform the Minister that the committee has agreed to proceed programme by programme A, B and C, and will focus on each programme at any one time. And what I would propose to do is, in relation to each programme, that the Minister, I don't know whether the Minister has opening comments in relation to each programme. If he doesn't, it's fine. But the Minister is invited to speak briefly on each programme, and then I'll open it up to the members then to ask questions, and probably most of the information will be elicited then. So I invite the Minister then to come forward and speak. Thank you.
Okay. Cahiirla agus Oireachtas as octa Capcom Shalada iniu fasta agus Guramagat Funchion Codaguji and Costa. Arvis asta a bhein seo agah aniu as Cora Costa chun Lordsliv fi Rev fi ní déag do marin mar is all do bháil an Costa tabar tábhachta a dhéanú ag marin agus an airnáil a jihaz agus skillana mar sin te se harve tábhachta go mé an rialtas ag chur airgid ar fáil don airnáil sa bhléon atá roin. The gross voted allocation for the Department of Education and Skills in 2019 is €10.3 billion. This breaks down as around €9.3 billion in current expenditure and €941 million in capital expenditure. The non-voted National Trading Fund has an allocation of €486 million, resulting in a total gross allocation for education and skills of nearly €10.8 billion. This represents a substantial increase of nearly €680 million over 6.7% above my department's allocation in 2018. The department's vote comprises 3 programmes: early years primary and post-primary, skills development and higher education. In previous years, there was a separate capital services programme, but capital subheads have been incorporated into the other three programmes. The additional allocation in 2019 will deliver a range of measures in the education and training system. It will support an additional 1,300 posts in schools, including around 950 special needs assistant posts and around a net 370 additional teacher posts catering for demographics and additional special classes. Schools will receive a 5% increase in capitation, with an increase of €10 million in school funding over the 1920 school year. This is the first increase in the standard rate of capitation since the period of reduction in capitation rates which took place from 2011 to 2015. We will be investing in improving outcomes for children with additional care needs, with €4.75 million allocated to commence the implementation of the comprehensive SNA review. School leadership will be supported with additional release days for teaching principals and the allocation of administrative deputy principal posts in special schools. The department's capital budget will be at its highest ever level at €941 million in 2019, an increase of over 26% on last year. Over €670 million will be invested in schools, including investment in ICT, and over €150 million in the tertiary education and training system. The department's allocation includes a package of nearly €99 million in measures in the tertiary education system. This includes nearly €70 million in funding arising from an increase in the National Training Fund levy over...
More useful if we just stuck to programme by programme, so we stick to programme A, which is primary, secondary and early years.
Yeah.
So I'm going to, if that's okay, the way I'm going to do the questions is not in order of, I don't know whether anyone has indicated, I'm going to do it myself, Sinn Féin, Kathleen Funchion, Jan O'Sullivan, Catherine Martin and Fine Gael. Because it's the Minister, I'm going to just go by order of party size, if that's okay. And then Fine Gael last, because they're in government. I think Am I right in saying that would be? And if the committees...
That's okay.
No, but that's. I think that's the traditional way we do these things, actually.
That's the first time we're doing it that way.
Yeah, in fairness, no, but anyway, it doesn't matter. No, it's fine. I'm just,
Indicating.
yes.
That's the first time we've ever done it that way, in fairness, Chair.
I'm glad you said that in public session. It's fine.
It's an order of party size. I mean, the part of this is holding the. If you can indicate, nobody indicates as far as I can see, anyway. So.
But I was waiting for the Minister to
Yeah.
finish.
Well, anyway, I've already. So, if the committee is okay with that, that's the way I'll propose to do it.
I haven't agreed to it because you completely changed the way the Education Committee has
You don't come in and take over and try and make new rules and regulations as you go along.
Well, if somebody had indicated, then it might have given me another option, but nobody indicated.
Out of courtesy to the Minister, the first thing you asked for was the Minister to make a statement, A, B and C or whatever else. And I think in courtesy to the Minister, the Minister gets an opportunity to speak first.
Tony. I'm going to ask my questions now. And there is no time limit on this. People will be able to come back as often as they want to get whatever questions they want asked.
And what order? What rota?
I'm proposing that it would be as set out. Fianna Fáil, Sinn Féin, Labour, Green and Government. And to Government.
When was this agreed?
Well, has someone... OK, well, I look for proposals for an alternative order then.
I propose that we do it the way we've always done it.
Exactly. Agreed.
Has anybody indicated? Well, if Sinn Féin are proposing that other parties get in ahead of them, that's Sinn Féin's business. So.
Chair, with all due respect, I assume that you're acting chair for this meeting, and the system in this committee has always been that those who indicate first come in first.
Two indicating.
And I think you should have the decency as well to hear out members when they're indicating. You may not agree with their points,
Okay,
but
that's
as
fine.
chair,
If you're happy for the government to go ahead here, that's fine.
Actually, I propose that we have a vice chair, so that we have an official vice chair for this committee.
I agree with the deputy here. It's about you're coming into the chair and you're changing the rules.
Sorry, you weren't here when the chair. You could have asked for someone else to be chair for the meeting. My colleague is
No,
sick.
there's no objection to you sitting in the chair. It's just how you're conducting the meeting. That's all.
Okay, it's to your. If things have worked out to your advantage, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I've no difficulty with it. Because it was to me, this was the traditional way when a minister is in a committee. That's the way.
We've never done it like that in this committee.
Anyway, it's job done. I have two indicated so far.
That never applied before, so don't be bringing in new rules or regulations today just because you're in the chair.
Congratulations, Tony, you're second. Okay, it's over. The matter is dealt with. My questions are first just the growth in the number of school places seems to be slowing somewhat, despite what appears to be a substantial increase in the capital budget for 2019 for schools in particular. Can the Minister explain this? And can the Minister tell us what the position is regarding construction inflation? Is that a big factor in his budget? Is that part of the reason for the increase in the capital budget?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Is the growth in construction costs affecting your capital budget? And is it part of the reason why there was a large capital budget this year, given the fact that the growth in the number of places being provided additionally is slowing certainly in additional primary school places, additional post-primary school places, and post-primary school facilities to enhance or replace by number of students? Or are there other reasons for it? Is there a focus on more necessary but more expensive projects? Is it site costs in urban areas? You know, what are the reasons for driving your capital budget higher when the outturns don't seem to be appreciating at the same rate? Are there any efficiencies that could be identified in projects earmarked for delivery in 2019? Can you tell us how many students will be moved from prefabs to permanent accommodation in 2019 as a result of the capital budget? Your capital budget provides for extra funding for school laboratories and PE halls. Are those projects already applied for? In that, are the schools aware of the projects that are being funded this year? Have we got planning permission for any or all of these projects? And are these projects all due for completion in 2019 in terms of the number of science labs and PE halls that you've provided for? Just on the current side, we had an issue there before on the number of pensioners. The figure seems to be the exact same this year as last year. And can the Minister explain that? And can he explain what changes have happened in the calculation of these figures? We were promised that this would all change and that there would be better preparation and better work with the Department of Public Expenditure, but the figures seem to be exactly the same. So the question really that I have is, what new system of calculating of predicting the number of pensioners could have resulted in effectively the same amount of pensioners retiring this year as was predicted last year? Could I just ask the Minister just for a brief comment on the payment to substitute teachers, and I'll come back then with other questions. And I think maybe if we do them in groups of 3, so Janice Sullivan then is next.
Thank you, Chair. So just on Programme A, just on one of the questions raised by the Acting Chairman, in terms of physical education coming in now more significantly as a subject, have you a policy decision in relation to PE halls now? There are a number of schools around the country that probably would argue very strongly that they have a difficulty with providing for the curriculum in the absence of the physical facilities. Now, I understood we were to mainly concentrate on the current rather than the capital expenditure, but as the Chairman's raised it, I would like to raise it as well. We could do
we're doing it on a programme by programme. So Programme A is current and capital in primary, the second level and early years.
Well, then my question just stands around whether there is a plan to, I suppose, roll out PE halls to schools around the country in order to facilitate physical education subject. Just secondly, in the figures that we got, I suppose understandably had a look at the ones that have gone down rather than up for 2019. And one of them is A7, which is salaries, wages and allowances of non-teaching staff in primary and post-primary schools. As the Minister will know, there's been a considerable concern in relation to both secretarial and caretaking staff, particularly obviously those who aren't paid directly by the department. So just can you clarify, Minister, if they are included in this statistic or if there's a separate allocation because they're paid directly from the school, because there is clearly serious concern around those particular people who are in a much less advantageous position than other people working in the same schools. Also, there's a 2% reduction in teacher education, which seems to be mostly CPD, as far as I can see, and the running of education centres. So maybe you could explain why there is a reduction there. And just finally, on A15, which is primary and post-primary infrastructure, it is a 15% increase, but it does include temporary school premises. And just if you could give us some information in relation to whether we're still using prefabs in a widespread way, whether there's been a significant either increase or decrease in terms of the length of time that students have to spend in prefabs while we wait for the more long-term school buildings. It's something that I think all of us would be concerned about, where some children spend, a large number of their school years in prefabs. I know there is, policy position to reduce the length of time that young people spend in prefabs, but whether how successful we are in terms of reducing obviously you sometimes have to have prefabs when you need them urgently for a growing population or growing need within a particular area, but in terms of reducing their use for more longer term. So they'd be my questions on Subhead A.
As the party spokespersons for the other opposition parties have yielded to Tony McLoughlin, I call him now.
Chairman, Minister, you're very welcome, and thanks very much. I have just two or three questions. Just first of all, perhaps maybe Will you be, Minister, increasing the capitation to schools in the next budget? I'd just like to know what your feeling is on that, and what idea.
I'll indicate what I want to indicate. You don't need to keep making smart comments. Your own professionalism as chair is unbelievable.
Sorry. I was quietly. Anyway, Deputy McLoughlin, continue.
So what are you saying? That you
I'm
prefer if I didn't ask questions at all,
I'm
is
asking
it?
you to continue. I'm asking you to continue.
Sorry, Minister, apologies for all this behaviour. Also,
Sir.
Minister, going forward, in relation to the second question is, how many extra SNAs and teachers are in the education system as a result of budget 2019? Perhaps you might be good enough to give me. And also, in just final question, Chair, if I have time. It's in relation to.
No, I'm not putting any limit on the time.
Okay, thanks very much. That's a relief. The school transport service. I know that each year Byrne administer the service on behalf of the department, but and I see there's an increase this year. But would that be adequate, Minister, in your opinion? Because I feel at times that Byrne are very, very hard at times to deal with in relation to complaints that I have had, and I'm sure others, going forward with various issues. So perhaps you might make a statement on those. Thanks, Minister.
I'll invite the Minister to respond to those.
Okay. Just thank all the deputies for their questions. Chairman, you were talking about growth in number of school places and explaining rationale behind is there a correlation between increase in prices, price inflation, increase in land prices, and the job that we're trying to do with our capital programme. Our focus is on the 2016 to 2019 capital programme, so the schools and the planned schools and the planned extensions and the major capital construction plans that we have, we continue to make that our focus for that period, 2016 to 2019. And as part of the, and you made the point that there's a reduction in the growth in the number of school places. Depending on what part of Ireland, depending on the geography, you're obviously very well and acutely aware of the pressures in your own constituency. And our guesstimates is done on a mathematical basis. We use GIS systems. We use the consultation through the Department of Housing, local authority, projected planning. So we try to identify where these pressures are going to be, and that's why my predecessor Richard Britton announced 42 new schools, looking at where we can see an increase in population. I was in Gorey 2 weeks ago and met with a number of primary school principals who are very, very anxious around the future of secondary school places, not next year, not this year, not next year, not the following year, but in 3 to 5 years' time. So there is an acute awareness of the pressures that are coming on in terms of where the next body of population and where the growth centres are going to be. And that's why it's so important that we keep all our projections, all our estimates, all our data under constant review. But in relation to the different standards, the different specs, in the last 2 to 3 years, there has been an increased emphasis on the environmental sustainability of buildings. We're putting a stronger focus to ensure that the design of the building is in keeping with environmental consideration. So we're conscious of that, and we're conscious that the design teams come back and make sure and have the proper environmental consideration at the heart of that. You referenced the prefab situation there as well, and just to give you a bit of data on that, 2018-19 will involve over 130 large-scale projects, which is about 38% of 340 projects, 280 smaller-scale projects, an additional accommodation scheme. This will deliver 40,000 school places, which includes additional and replacement, and the replacement of over 600 prefabs, which is a key element of our prefab replacement programme. And you asked a specific question, how many students are we talking about? We talk in terms of prefabs, but I'd be happy enough to get that data for you at a later stage. You also talked about the policy around, you asked about school laboratories, PE halls, and can I include home economics upgrades as well. There's a constant reconfiguration of internal parts of the building, whether it's engineering rooms, whether it's art rooms, whether it's school laboratories. So we try to keep a pace with that, but specifically to do PE with PE halls, and to take in the question of Deputy Jan O'Sullivan as well. We are looking to the next capital plan, the 10-year capital plan, to incorporate a fully incorporated PE hall provision. And I'm conscious of the fact that we've introduced a pilot PE to Leave Insert, which will be coming in to all schools. The option for all schools will be in 2020. And I'm conscious of the fact that we do have a weak infrastructure when it comes around to that PE provision and that the suite of PE halls in the country. We're looking at ways of how we can best move that forward. I'm conscious also that, and I've said this publicly before, there's no point us putting together a comprehensive PE suite of infrastructure for secondary schools if we don't go hand in glove with the primary schools as well. And I'm also conscious that throughout rural Ireland there's primary schools on the back of hills that aren't near community centres, aren't near parochial halls, aren't near parish centres, and it's something that we really need to focus on as to what level of sporting infrastructure we can provide at primary school level, because the statistics point to half of all girls dropping out of physical activity when they reach the age of 12 to 13. So if we're going to put on Leave Insert, physical literacy, physical education, and a lot of the cohort of the young people are already dropped out, that's a major challenge we have. And I think there is a piece of work and a body of work that needs to be done in relation to how we provide that. I know schools are being very creative. A lot of schools introduce all the sports that some of us would have participated in, from rounders to skipping, to the not so traditional sports that we see the coaches coming in, from rugby to hurling to Gaelic football to soccer. But we also need to keep a focus on the difference between physical education and physical activity.
Mr. Just on that, the question really that I asked was, there were 48 PE halls this year, 200 laboratories this year in the revised estimates. And the question was, what are the procedures for applying to get one of these PE halls replaced or refurbished? Or are these already on lists, and are there planning applications in or pending, or will they be built this year at all?
Every new build, every new major capital build is going to have a PE hall. But what I've been saying is, as part of the new 10-year capital plan, if schools are already expressing interest that they want to have PE halls prioritised in the new capital plan, and that is something that we need to...
The 48 PE halls that you're talking about here, are they part of the 130 major projects that are going to be completed this year?
Well, some PE halls, because of the state of the repair they're in, some of them will need roof replacement, some of them will need upgrades. So in terms of the schools that are outside, like, it's not all new buildings. There's a lot of schools within the 2016 to 2021 capital programme that is extensions or additional accommodation, and part of that suite of that solution will be PE halls as well.
But if there's 48 this year, and I'm a school in somewhere down the country who hasn't got a PE hall, and I know Deputy Martin is certainly one of her constituencies she talks about, can that school apply
the schools
to you now for a PE hall this year to be one of the 48?
The schools are already applying to get on the list for the next capital plan. Like
Sorry, I have to stop you there. This is the revised estimates for 2019. I'm more than happy to have a discussion about the capital plan for the next 10 years, but we're talking about this year's estimates.
Yeah. And if you're not on a capital plan within the 16 to 21 capital plan, you're obviously looking at the next capital plan if you want to get a new PE hall in your school. And that's something that I know and I'm conscious of, that there's schools the length and breadth of this country that feel that they want a solution before 2021, before 2022, before 2023, and that's something we have to collectively work on in terms of prioritisation. Deputy O'Sullivan also asked the question around secretarial and caretaking staff, which a lot of those funds are paid out of the ancillary funds. And I'm conscious as well that a campaign has started, and I know you've advocated on behalf of them already. I've met with Forsa. They're already engaging with the school secretaries, and not all school secretaries fall into this complement. We've got 1978, 1979 solutions for some school secretaries. But one thing I'm finding when I go into the primary schools and I meet with the secretaries, the level of modesty in the first instance of secretaries when it comes to their role, and they're very modest when they say, like, they don't shout out the role that they play, but it's an integral part of the school. I met one of the secretaries in Drumshambo yesterday in Leitrim, and from speaking to the principal, she outlined all the work that she does. So I am conscious that there is a body of work that needs to be done there. My officials are on hand to meet with Forsa. That is something that I've already said in public record. It was raised in the Dáil recently, and I think conversation has to start, and communication is key to finding a solution in this.
But even increasing the ancillary grants in the meantime, while a better, bigger solution is.
Yeah, well, look, that'll be in the context of the budget. So, look, I'm conscious of the fact that the day-to-day running of schools is something that primary schools in particular, and look, and secondary schools as well, they're on, whether it's oil, whether it's a day-to-day bread and butter running of schools, it's a big issue, and the 5% increase in capitation was something that, you know, was the start of moving in the right direction, but I'm conscious it certainly isn't far enough. And just the improvement, just to be conscious as well, there were improvements made to the secretary and caretaker grants in 2016, 17 and 18 and 19 to enable schools to implement the arbitration salary increase for grant-funded school secretaries and caretakers, and also for pay increases for cleaners, and to also implement the restoration of salary for cleaners arising from the unwinding of the FEMPI legislation. So look, while there has been increases, I'm still conscious that it's the stability and certainty around the role of caretaking staff and some secretarial staff as well. And you also referenced the prefab issue, which is a reference there in terms of the number of prefabs we're looking to replace. And you know, I've been to many primary schools now, and there's primary school young people in 5th and 6th class that have spent all their education in primary school in prefabs, and some of them not in great shape, but waiting for the new build to come along and waiting for the new extension to come along. And I know that there is a lot of patience out there, but sometimes patience has only a certain limit when it comes to trying to get the education environment in a good place. And when you go into some of the newer schools, primary and secondary schools, and see the light and see how they're adapting to the building suitability for autistic young people and the suitability for young people with special needs, it's something that we have to keep a very, very strong focus on. Deputy McLoughlin referenced the capitation increase from last year. Well, you were asked the question for next year's budget. I'm conscious that it was reduced by 11% in 2011. It was a big, big reduction. It was a big, big hit for schools. We've come back up 5%, but I know there's still a body of work to do there, Deputy, and certainly my conversations with my officials is on a weekly basis, and one of the things that I want to re-emphasise, and I know it's coming from this committee as well, the importance of capitation, and we'll look at that in the context of the next budget. We'll have 950 extra SNAs this year, which will bring the cohort of SNAs up to about 16,000. This year, in terms of extra teaching staff, we're up at nearly 400, 372, and that is part of an overall increase to the effectiveness of schools. And just yesterday in Scully Padraig and Drumshambo, the principal pointed to the fact that the SNAs in her school keep the school moving. Yeah. That's how integral and intrinsically linked they are to the school. They don't work in silos. They're very much part of that. And I'm very, very anxious to push ahead with the SNA recommendation. We're going to be looking at a pilot in that area, and I want to see more integration between the HSC and the Department of Education. We'll make that happen. It'll be done on a pilot basis in September of this year, and we'll be looking at key issues which were raised, I think, in my first week in the job here in this committee, around if there's a clinical nurse needed, if there's a speech and language professional needed, if there's an occupational therapist needed. How do we work in a more collective way around that? And certainly, I'm looking at that pilot as being the signalling post for how we develop in the future. You also asked around school transport, and you're right, anybody living in a rural constituency, the phones start ringing the last week in August. There are issues. Now, in defence of Bus Éireann, I think it's a mammoth task that they have to do every year, and it changes every year, the numbers change every year, new people coming in, other people leaving, and they have to do it, and obviously they work within the rules and guidelines of the policy that they're given. But just let the committee know, I'm working with the officials on the whole school transport area. Minister John Halligan has been very, very proactive in this area, and he's looking at ways and how we can introduce a bit more common sense around that area, because I know Deputy Funchion has raised this issue in her own constituency as well, and sometimes local people can come up with a common sense solution, but if the policy wall comes up against them, it leads to unbelievable frustration. And I'm very conscious that there's a lot of parishes we have to try to protect as best we possibly can, the integrity of the parishes, the integrity of traditional school choice, and sometimes the closest school may not be the traditional school of choice for many people. And when this change came in 2012, it got rid of the closed school amalgamation rule. It caused a lot of upset. It caused a lot of upset in communities, and it's something that I'm very conscious of, and it's something I'm working very closely with my colleague, Minister John Halligan.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I just unfortunately have to put this on the record. I know some members took umbrage at the rota that I laid forward. I just want to say that the rota that I laid forward is as set out in the chairing guidelines. I accept the members weren't happy with that, but that was my only motivation, and that was the way things were done before. It is set out the party spokespersons would be asked first, and it's the only reason I did it. I was a bit taken aback at the reaction, but anyway, it's no skin off my nose whatsoever. Deputy Funchion was the next to indicate.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Minister. First of all, I was going to ask about school transport, so I'm glad you covered that one, and I welcome the fact that you're looking at potential changes along with Minister Halligan, because I think one of the big things is that nearest school rule criteria, and if that could be looked at, it might alleviate some of the stress for everybody involved, parents, students, everybody that gets the queries on Bus Éireann themselves. So that's a welcome step, and I hope that there will actually be progress on that, because it is a big issue and one that we just continue to come across. I just wanted to ask about the special needs assistants. You can see obviously they've been increasing, and the number that's provided is an estimated 15,950. Is that figure coming from the National Council for Special Education? And I'm not querying that figure, but we're still coming across an awful lot of cases where and I think it could be down to maybe some sort of a blockage in the system, or again a bit of a lack of common sense with these things, where children are, for whatever reason, may have to switch schools during the school term, let's say this time of year, for example, and they're being told that if they do that, they cannot get a special needs assistant until September. So if you have any information on that, and also in cases where there's still, even though it's in their reports, the various reports that people have from their psychologists, that they would recommend a special needs assistant, and the CNO has overruled that. I just wonder sometimes I wonder about the level of power that the CNOs have in terms of making those decisions. I mean, if a number of professionals in the medical world are saying this child would benefit from a special needs assistant, and then they're saying no, and they don't ever really seem to have to give any detailed reason for that to a parent, and it can be quite difficult, because you're usually dealing with, like in our area, we have 2 CNOs, so there's not kind of much wiggle room to speak to anybody else in relation to it, and it does still come up. And even though we have heard, and it's a welcome development, that the special needs assistants are increasing, there does still seem to be issues in certain areas, and I just wonder, is that something that can be raised with the National Council for Special Education? Because I think that it mightn't even be to do with the number of special needs assistants that are available. It could be to do with some breakdown in the system in relation to that. I just wanted to take the opportunity to ask about that. That's my main question, Chair. Thanks.
Not.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Minister, for your opening statement. Just in relation to the JESH schools, and the Irish Times have an initiative called No Child 2020, and it looks at the child welfare, disadvantage of children in schools and class divide. And I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on, I suppose, the funding for JESH schools and also in relation to the criteria in determining which schools are JESH, because I know a number of them are applying across the country and obviously feel that they are eligible, and there are some blockages there in relation to being eligible. So just the funding and the extra resources for these particular schools where you'd have many disadvantaged children attending. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Just to say that it might be something we discuss in private session. I actually raised my hand at the exact same time as Deputy O'Sullivan and as high as she did. So
I'm going by the advice. I've apologised.
Okay.
I didn't see it.
Right.
We've a list
I just
written by the
assumed you'd
clerk.
say
It's a list written by the clerk, and I'm taking his advice. So apologies from me.
And in relation to other items and how that's run, I'd leave it until private session, but I would request that we get private time a session after this to discuss it. So thank you, Minister. This is the section, I suppose, that deals with salaries, so I'd like to call out the elephant in the room, which is pay inequality. And I am aware of the ECJ ruling earlier in recent weeks, that said, I'd say the government were pleased with that ruling. It said that the age discrimination was more discrimination based on the date of entry, but that's a technicality when we all know that the vast majority of entry to the pay scales are young people. So it's young teachers who are continually being sold out. The current arrangement worked out by the government in September, which comes into effect soon, does not address the fundamental underlying issue, that is equal pay for equal work. And I would ask you, Minister, to, unlike your predecessor, to please recognise the principle of equal pay for equal work. And I read yesterday with interest the news of the job sharing scheme for teachers. It's maybe a move that is necessary, but it's fundamentally missing out on the point of why over 90% of our schools are struggling to recruit teachers, and that's pay discrimination. Equality is equality. You can't have partial equality, which is what the government approach seems to envision. You can't have a situation where everyone is equal, but some people are more equal than others, which is what our young teachers are feeling at the moment. So I would really urge you to commit to that principle of equal pay for equal work, and also just to point out that the issue of recruitment and retention, it's also there because of the cost facing our graduates of the two-year professional masters in education. It's also there because that problem of retention and recruitment because of the conditions of work, the initiative overload, document after document coming in, change after change, the quality of resources, the facilities in the schools, needless to say the class size, and also the need for a supplementary panel. But to go on to another point here is the superannuation section under this heading. The last few years we've approved substantial supplementary estimates every year to deal with unexpected expenditure, and every year we bring it up. So I'm just wondering, has the Minister managed to sort out this anomaly? And I'd be grateful if you would provide an update and plans to develop a sustainable superannuation forecasting and funding model and a timeline for its completion. I'd also ask that you in relation to the PE halls that other Deputy O'Sullivan, Deputy Byrne have brought up, and I know you said there you were conscious of the fact that there's weak infrastructure. I'd like if a little bit more light was shed on that, because since I got elected here I've asked for an audit of all schools so we can establish exactly what schools do not have, or how many schools do not have PE halls, but every time I put in that question there's a refusal to do it. And yes, there is one in my constituency, but there are others, and I just don't understand how it can be this PE can be rolled out fairly and equally when there are students without PE halls. So I'd asked for that audit. I welcome the funding that has been allocated for wellbeing, and following our own report on positive mental health in schools, including the funding for 10 additional education psychologists. I'm just wondering, does the Minister have any plans to increase these numbers in the future? And And finally, just when I do have you here, Minister, just to bring up the call in recently for geography to be restored as a core subject in the junior cycle curriculum. I welcome that you are reviewing history, the drop-in of history, and I would really ask you, plead with you, to review the decision to remove geography as a core subject too. We have students outside Leinster House every Friday. We have a movement for climate strike across the world led by Greta Thunberg on March the 15th. Our students get it. Geography is crucial in educating our students on one of the most urgent issues facing humankind. And I think it's shocking this government would move to remove geography as a core subject. And I would ask you to reconsider, as you did with history, the removal of geography and restore it, please, as a core subject. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay. Thank the deputies for the questions, and look, also your observations as well. And just start with Deputy Funchion in relation to, I know we covered transportation, but just maybe to give you a few figures. You did ask about the amount of money that's involved on a yearly basis. The cost of the school transport scheme in 2018, it amounted to €200 million. So that's an increase from over 171 million in 2011 to 200 million in 2018. And the main reason for that increase in cost is the provision of special educational needs transport, which now accounts for over 50% of the total cost of the scheme. And one thing that I'm quite conscious of as well is that a lot of our very vulnerable young people have to travel large distances to get to the appropriate school, and it's something that is very, very evident when I go into mainstream schools and special schools. The number of children on SEN transport has increased from 9,200 pupils in 2013 to over 13,000 pupils in 2018. And that's reflective in the increase in classes as well. They've gone from 475 special classes to about 1,500 this year. The cost of the provision of SEN transport, special educational need transport, has increased from just over 60 million in 2011 to 106 million in 2018. And just lastly, just for the purpose of public record here on the committee, the main cost of contractors providing SEN services from around 42 million in 2011 to 73 million in 2018, and the cost of provision of school bus escorts has gone from 15 million to 29 million as well in 2018. But part of that's not where the complication, as you've correctly identified, is in relation to school transport. It's in relation to getting students to a traditional school of choice or to a school that's respecting the integrity of their area. And I mean, that's mainly for primary school, but in relation to the changes we're looking to do, it's mainly a lot of it's to do with secondary schools. You also you raise again the SNA and the complications, and you use the terminology a blockage in the system. Like the people who are coming to my constituency office, they're waiting for a diagnosis report, and I want to get away from that. You as a committee want to get away from that as well. You want to have the same type of model in terms of profiling the school rather than the one-to-one SNA. And one of the key recommendations that came out of the SNA review was that it was the stigmatisation and alienation that sort of older kids around 4th class, 5th class, 6th class felt in relation to the one-to-one SNA. So that's at one level. I know you're talking about the more complex area, and what I want to do, I want to really focus in on this pilot now that we're going to be getting going in September, and looking at how we can have a more integrated approach where we identify the young person in preschool rather than that parent having to go through the hardship and difficulty of just dealing at a first point of entry in primary school. A lot of the knowledge and data and intelligence that the system has at preschool should decide what's going to happen in primary school. So it's about reprofiling the schools, whereby the school is not relying on a demand-led one-to-one assessment or diagnosis, and we need to get away from that system. And I'm hoping that through our vigilance at a political level and looking at how we can have more of a joined-up approach, whether it's the training that's needed for an SNA. I know a lot of people, a lot of parents, even with children with complex medical needs, they want their child to be in a mainstream setting. They want to have that choice, and we should be able to afford them that choice. But that will require training of SNAs. We don't have a higher authority for training, a training authority for SNAs, and that's something that's going to go hand in glove with the pilot to ensure that the experiences that the SNAs have built up over the last 2 decades, that if SNAs want to go back and retrain, re-equip them with the skills needed for the more complex needed, that they're afforded to do that. But I know for a lot of SNAs as well, there's the issue of certainty, and trying to find a job is a difficult. I'm getting, hearing this from my colleagues around the country, that even though we've got 16,000 SNAs, 45% increase since 2011, there's still that uncertainty because the SNAs following the students rather than having a whole school model which will give them in the long term more certainty. So that's the place I want to go to, but with your help as a committee there will be other areas that we can work together on. Deputy Naughton raised the issue of JESH schools. The JESH schools really were done on a geographical basis, and as a result of that, geographical areas that didn't fall into this socio-economic categorisation were completely left out. And I'm getting a lot of representation from schools that are not in JESH, and when you consider in the past that JESH was somewhat of a stigma at the time, and schools were wondering, will I go into it or will I not go into it? But now we have the opposite, where the schools that have JESH want to hold on to it, and the people who don't have JESH want it because they see the development of the individual. So what I'm going to do is, we've collected all the data. We'll be ready at the end of this first quarter, doing a demographical, socio-economic analysis of the entire country, and seeing about looking at a more gradual, a more targeted approach to JESH, and that will require a lot of work to ensure that schools, we get to meet the need of the most vulnerable. And I know, some schools have different JESH bands. Some schools see the value in homeschool liaison. There's a meal programme, but there's extra resources as well. There's this class size. All these are added advantage for a school. But one of the things that I'm going to be having as an integral part of the 3-year plan for the Department of Education is looking at bridging that gap between JESH and non-JESH schools. It's already happening, but I think we can do more to advance that. And secondly, is to look at the progression. And we're very, very lucky that we've come from, in the last space of 10 years, if you look at the progression, and to use Larkin College in the city centre here, from speaking to their principal and staff, they're looking at an 80% progression into higher diploma, into apprenticeships, and into higher and third level, and that's a massive progress, and that's a JESH school as well. So a lot of schools are aiming to replicate that, and obviously it's something that I want to do, is look at a more gradual and a more targeted approach. Deputy Martin, the issue in relation to new entrants and equal pay for equal work. Look, I'm on public record saying that there is unfinished business with regard to this. We obviously were working within the parameters of the Public Sector Stability Agreement, and I'm also conscious of the fact that where you create that vulnerability in a staff room setting, bring it back to the staff room setting where there's people around the table having a cup of tea, doing the same job and for less money, that does create a negative, and it's something that I'm conscious of. I know the unions are working on this. I know it's something that I have discussed with my colleague Pascal Donoghue. I'm also conscious that my colleague Minister Harris has been through this in relation to the recent nurses' strike, and what I want to do is I want to create a pathway that at the end of 2020, that we move in, that we have work done prior to that to ensure that we bring about this resolution. It's about, there were changes in 2011 in relation to the grade that came in, both primary and secondary. It's acknowledgement of the HDIP, it's acknowledgement for primary school teachers, their qualifications, PGSE, and what I want to do is I want to continue working within the framework of the Public Service Stability Agreement and see how we can move towards a place in the next round to see about eliminating this.
Towards the Equality Minister.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
And the start for that, so you mean the next round of pay talks?
Yes.
No.
Yeah. At the end of 2020. Yeah. And if there's things within the machinery of existing, like there's always, within the existing framework, if there's things that can be done there, obviously, it's something that I respect the whole area of collective bargaining. And it's got teachers now to a position that a starting salary for a teacher in 2020 is going to be nearly 38,000 a year. And I know for the 2011 entrants, their starting salary this year will be upwards of 53,000. But I'm also conscious of the fact that they took a reduction as well, and it's for the acknowledgement and for the appreciation of the HDIP and the teacher qualification. We're talking about €43 million. So these are the figures that we're looking at, and these are the figures that we have to work within the existing mechanisms. You mentioned the job sharing scheme yesterday. Back in the 1970s, I remember the ETBs worked in this scheme. There's some schools that have been working on an ad hoc basis in relation to job sharing at secondary school level, and it's not going to address the big issue of teacher supply. And I'm under no illusion of that. But look, if there is a maths teacher in the base school on 12 hours and the host school is looking for 7 hours, there can be a bit of common sense joined up thinking around that. And I know principals, if they spot that opportunity, they will go for it. And I know from speaking to principals as well, it's about timetabling. And if there's distances involved, the teacher has to be compensated for the time travelling and also compensated for that interruption of his or her daily day. But what we'll try and do is, and teachers will when they're getting the approval from the department officials, we have to ensure that that you don't be travelling within the one day. If you're going to one school, try to do it within one day. But I know it's to re-emphasise again, this is not a solution for the overall teacher supply issue, but it's something that I would encourage principals to work on, which I know they will. You also mentioned recruitment and retention, and it's a big issue, but I know from the new courses, and especially the master's courses that we've introduced this year to Mary I, and looking at other courses at an undergraduate level, it takes time to do that. I'm also conscious as somebody who's an advocate of return to learning, and somebody who's a great advocate, has been a strong advocate of returning to education. It's very difficult for somebody who's in the circle of paying bills and paying mortgages to come out of a system to go back full-time. And I know we increased the funding for student support this year as well, but in relation to retention, it's an issue which I'm conscious of. But within the teacher supply consortium that's up and going, there are initiatives, but I want to look at ways of trying to address the issue that there's a number of teachers in the southeast of England and in the United Arab Emirates, and we have to be practical in the conversations we have with them in trying to find out or trying to encourage them, or even to not necessarily encourage, because a lot of teachers are waiting on the prospect of getting a job, but it's the not knowing and the certainty around that, and when interviews are held. So I'm doing a piece of work at the moment with my officials on that, Deputy. You talk about the initiative overload, and that's something I'm getting back from the staff room. There's been a lot of change. There's a lot of change happening already. A lot of change for the good. In the school yesterday, in the schools I go out around the country, they're doing the wellbeing piece really well. They're looking at creative ways. They're doing the social inclusion bit. teaching is happening in a very, very holistic way within schools, and I think central to the way teaching is going on today, and from my observations, is it's a dignity and respect piece that they have within the school setting, the way teachers respect young people respect teachers, and respecting the whole school environment, and having parents front and centre as well, having community front and centre, and also the integration of business, not just within secondary schools but within primary school. And I think we can learn a lot from what's going on in schools to develop the policies that we're trying to do. But the wellbeing policy is working really, really well, and it's trying to get students in touch with their own issues and to be honest and upfront with the challenges that they're faced. You talk about the audit of all schools. I think there was a piece of work done a number of years ago on the audit of all school buildings. Like secondary schools are in a better position than primary schools, and it's a big piece of work. And I did emphasise there's a weakness in this infrastructure, and we have to try to figure a way of doing it. If we were to use the full 8.4 billion towards building gyms on all of the 4,000 primary and secondary schools, it wouldn't even be enough to do that.
But through the Chair, my question is, do you have a number for how many second-level schools in Ireland do not have a PE hall?
I can get to that number.
Please.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I can get to that figure, yeah. And you reference funding for wellbeing, and also you welcome the 10 additional education psychologists, and will there be more? I hope we will be in a position to roll out more support around that, because if we're serious about the development of the whole inclusion model, we have to look at more supports around that. Lastly, you talked about the history review. I did commit to doing the history review back towards the end of last year, on the basis that there was a big conversation, and I was meeting people in the street, and you likewise would be meeting people randomly coming up to me in the street about history. Not just history teachers, not just history fanatics, not just people who would have even studied history, but I just think there's been a big change in the way we look at history in the last 4 to 5 years. I think 2016 contributed to that. And I think there's a yearning to find out more about our past. So that was the motivation I had when it comes to the history review. It's only to review the history. I know there's been recent representations on geography. There was representations on home economics a couple of months ago as well. And what I want to do is I want to give the National Council for Curriculum Assessment the space and time now to see what conclusions and what recommendations to come up with the history review. And I know we're looking at there's a lot of short courses there in relation to from philosophy, and we're looking now at Lithuanian on the junior cert course as well. So there's a broad spectrum. But I do get your point around the importance of the geographical challenges that we do have in the whole environmental area. So I take your point.
So you want to close the door on a review then, Minister? Well,
look, I suppose my predecessors were very much involved in the junior cert curriculum changes, and in fairness, it was a very difficult job to do that. I'm not just saying that because Deputy Sullivan's sitting in front of me, because it did meet with a lot of resistance, and a lot of it was justifiable, because teachers were trying to figure out how could they be fair, how can they ensure that they're able to continue doing the other important pieces of education. So it was a massive change at the time. But one of the things that came out of it was to try to give more choice and try to give a broader spectrum. And to answer your question, I don't have any plans at the moment to do any more reviewing around that. But I do want to see what the history review comes back and see what. So you're not shutting the door on it then? Well, I think.
No, on a serious note, I really think this. I'd appreciate if you said you wouldn't shut the door on it. I just think it's really important for our students. Like you talk about the people you met in the street, about history, and maybe 2016. I think everything that's happened around the world, and apart from climate change, but God, where we situate ourselves as a country and the context of the world and everything that's happened around us,
Yeah,
I think that's essential, and you will hear those conversations as well, Minister. So if you hear those conversations, are you open to a review?
No. Well, look. What I'm open to is to help the junior cert embed itself, because look, it's been a massive change. A lot of teachers are still grappling with the new syllabi and the new curriculum, and a lot of it is continuous-based assessment, and there's a whole new dynamic there. And the last thing I want to be adding to it is to create another sense of flux around it, and that's why I was very careful to just. History was the one that we're doing for a review. That is all I planned for. I know there is a campaign ongoing in relation to geography, and where does the domino stop? So, to be honest, I have to say I'm shutting the door in terms of what I plan to do for the moment. But I will be interested to hear what will come out of the review of the history curriculum. To be honest, I don't even know what's going to come out. They know what my wishes are. They know what Thomas Byrne's wishes are. They know what the members of the committee's wishes are. But they're an independent group, and I suppose I'm allowing them the latitude to come up with their own conclusions.
Well, please listen to the conversations that are happening every Friday outside Leinster House on Kildare Street with our students who, they had the opportunity of studying geography as a core subject, and they're very well informed on what's happening around the world. So I'd ask you to
yeah, well, look,
students.
I have a responsibility to listen. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I've allowed, and as I always take myself, wide latitude in terms of the questions that are asked. So I'm going to see if anybody wants to ask anything else. But I would suggest that we would confine it to the estimates in this round. And I'm not putting any time limit, but maybe in the interest of time, we would confine it to the estimates, because I think it is an important function. I just have a couple of questions there. I may have more, but I don't want to take all the. Some other members may have some of the issues too. First is just, and I just want to pin you down on this, Minister, in response to Deputy Martin in relation to pay equality, you said that there are things that can be done that you'd support within the pay talks, and I wonder, could you suggest some of those things that could be done within the pay talks in terms of pay equality?
No, I'm not, because out of respect for collective bargaining, there's processes, and I think if you look at what happened in the recent discussions around the nurses, it was done, and my colleagues were very, very anxious and very, very adamant that whatever changes or whatever proposals will be made within the mechanism of collective bargaining, and I totally respect that process, and I wouldn't make any suggestions. No.
Okay. The second point I want to raise is in relation to school places and the capital spend. Now, I know your briefing from the department gives us 40,000 places replaced or provided. But when I look at the page 102 of the estimate document itself, the details of the programme, what I'm looking at is in 2018 an output target for additional places at primary, additional places at post-primary, enhance or replace at primary, enhance or replace at post-primary. So it's 18,900 in total that I add, and your officials can double-check this, for 2018. Now that reduces in 2019 to a total of 18,850. So you have 50 less school places according to this document. And yet, at the same time, the money provided for school building and capital services at primary and second level goes up by 82,400,000, so from 539,600,000 to 622. Now that's really effectively about a 20% increase per place. And are my figures correct, or am I reading this document right? That would mean that for an extra 82,400,000 that you've secured from the Minister of Public Expenditure, you're actually getting 50 less places. But I'll invite you to answer the question if your officials have an answer to that.
I mean, look, as I said earlier, there is price inflation. There's no question about it. And if you look at somebody who was building a house 10 years ago, and if they get the price they got 10 years ago, it certainly wouldn't be the same price that we get today. But our focus and the priority of the department is to ensure that we finish out the 2016 to 2021 capital plan. That's where our focus is, and we'll do that in the most economic and efficient way that we possibly can. And we're looking at different ways of doing that. Take, for example, the ADAPT scheme, which we're going to try to ensure that we put a project management team into some of these new schools as well, where we can try and get them done in a more efficient and in a more timely way as well. There's a good number of the new capital bill, the length and breadth of the country. We've tried different ways. I know there's the pros and cons with respect to PPPs, but it's about finding the most efficient and economic way of doing that. Increase in land prices, you're raising in the Dáil, price of land in Dublin in my first couple of weeks in the job. There are obviously increased pressures when it comes to increase in commercial land. So, look, my priority is to follow through in the commitment of the capital plan from 16 to 21, and that's the one that we're going to fast track.
But is it the case that you're getting less growth in school places for substantially more money?
I don't think so. I mean, look.
No, but the question is, am I right? And I don't know whether your officials have it.
Yeah. Well, like you have, you look at your summer work scheme. You look at your emergency accommodation. You look at all the works that can lead to additional accommodation, small extensions to classrooms. Like we have, you obviously have price inflation. You obviously have increase in land prices. So you're going to have increased pressures on prices. So will that have an effect on the output and the delivery of additional places? Yes, it will.
Because I think I'm right in saying that even with, say, primary numbers nationally reducing or starting to reduce,
yeah,
you're still going to have massive pressure in the urban areas. Yeah?
We're going to have massive pressure in the urban areas. We're going to have massive pressure on the secondary school system. At the moment, if you look at all the increased extensions of classrooms in the primary school sector, that now is going to move into the secondary place. But I'm under no illusion that the urban areas, and these urban areas don't necessarily have to be on the East Coast and in your own constituency, the urban areas from Gorey to Cork or Galway, or the big towns that are going to grow, be it Portlaoise or Letterkenny, the numbers of population are going to grow there as well.
Are there any other members offering? Because I have other questions, but I don't want to ask them till. Catherine or John, no further questions, have you?
That section, no.
Well,
sorry.
There was one that I don't think I got answered.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
There was one I think wasn't answered for me. It was the one around the reduction in teacher education, the 2.3% reduction. Is that just because CPD was kind of wound up for the junior cycle reform, and is it coming back down, or what's the reason for that reduction?
Well, look, one of my core objectives in my plan, in my 3-year strategy, is going to be to have CPD at the heart of that. I think we can do more in relation to CPD. The 2% reduction is quite possibly down to there was an increase during the junior cycle reform, as you pointed out, but I can't see how we're going to go into reduction space when we're committed to providing more professional training to teachers, and we need to do more of that. We need to concentrate.
It is specifically on your documentation there for A12 teacher education.
Yeah. Look, I mean, the information I have here, even though it's saying it's minus 2% reduction, it's reflective of now turned to 2018 underspend 3 million versus reduction in 2019 allocation of 1 million. So therefore, it's not a reduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is by far the largest programme, but just one very quick question. You've touched on it there. What I find frightening about the school places and your capital programme and the figures here is you mentioned Gorey, and my colleagues have been on to me from Gorey. Yeah. I keep mentioning Ashbourne, Minister, and I need an answer on that too. I had a colleague on from Ennis. I heard stories in Limerick. And none of these areas feature very heavily on the 42 schools, if I recall. Certainly not Gorey, I think, or Ashbourne. Is it time to review that particular programme in terms of where schools are required?
Well, the review is ongoing. We're going to keep a very, very close, and we're going to monitor very closely. I was in Limerick last Friday. There's a big cohort of schools in that national bundle already, so they didn't come under the 42 schools, as you pointed out. Obviously, there was a focus on the numbers there when they were getting into the capital plan. But if you look at Ennis, or if you mentioned Gorey, we have to keep that under constant review. And if you look at the planning permissions, and it was just, from my own empirical, data and conversations with colleagues, like the planning permissions are coming in fast and furious at the moment, and if there's going to be an increase, to use Gorey as an example, if there's going to be an increase in housing estates and development in Gorey, they have to look at about and plan for the next 5 to 10 years. And if you consider the road infrastructure between Dublin and Gorey, you're talking about, on a clear run, you're talking about 1 hour distance between Dublin and Gorey, so it becomes nearly a very appetising prospect of moving to an area which obviously will have less the cost factor in relation to purchasing of houses. But with regard to Gorey, they have 2 very good schools. They've a capacity of 1,000 schools in Crea Secondary School in Gorey, and they will be able to meet the capacity this year. They will be able to meet the capacity next year. It's got a capacity of 1,000 schools or 1,000 students, and it also has an increased capacity of another to bring it up to 1,200. So, and then there's obviously Gorey Community School, which is maxed out at the minute.
All right. I'll move on to skills development, which is programme B. Do you want to say something about this, Minister, or do you want me to just go straight to questions?
Yeah, well, maybe a couple of the highlighted figures here. The Department's allocation includes a package of nearly 99 million in measures in the tertiary education system. This includes nearly 70 million in funding arising from an increase in the National Training Fund levy, over 16 million exchequer funding for demographics and higher education, and nearly 14 million in reallocating funding within further education and training to reflect changing economic priorities. Among other things, this will deliver additional places on springboard courses, support for the Higher Education Performance and Innovation Fund, a research fund for technological universities and institutes of technology, increased provision for flexible learning, management and leadership capacity building in higher education institutions, increased apprenticeship registrations and new apprenticeship schemes. As part of Budget 2019, the Government also announced a new human and capital initiative which will involve investment of 300 million in higher education over the 5-year period 2020 to 2024, with 60 million being available in each of those years. The Department's will I do higher education? Would you want me to cover it now, or do you want to? Okay.
You're finished on programme B. I think Catherine had her hand up.
Thank you very much.
And then Tony, then you.
On skills development. Yes, I note that of November 2018, the number of female apprentices has surpassed the 2018 target, which was 300, and it stood at 323. So that's good news and very welcome, Minister. I would be grateful if you could comment on how this came about and what further plans the Minister has for reaching the ambitious target of 2019, which I see is a doubling of that for 600 female apprentices. In relation to the National Training Fund, the increase is maintaining a substantial surplus, which is going to form the Human Capital Initiative from the next year onward until 2024. I appreciate this is still a year away and Brexit is still between now and then, but do you have any further information on how exactly this initiative would operate?
Through
the National Training Fund.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, please. And in relation to subhead 5, solace and further education grants, the number of apprentices and trainees has doubled since 2016, from 6,000 to now over 12,000. But the combined allocation has only increased by 9%. Can you elaborate on this, please?
Further, under the further education grants as well, just what Deputy Catherine has mentioned there in relation to apprentices. We spoke at length at our last meeting, both yourself and Minister Mitchell O'Connor. There is a huge emphasis on apprentices, and rightly so, to encourage more people into the various apprentices. But have we the funding or the allocation? Is it adequate to cater for the demands that are there? And I know that it's increasing on a regular basis now, year in, year out. It's increasing, and I'm just wondering, have we the funds available to encourage more people across the board? Thank you.
Thanks, Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a really important section. First of all, the whole area of apprenticeship, springboard, and all of these various opportunities for young people to find really positive careers. I also welcome the growing number of apprenticeships in general and female apprenticeships, as Deputy Martin has referred to. Just the Apprenticeship Council has been rolling out new types of apprenticeships in conjunction with industry and higher education and further education. Just, are there any more new ones to come? I'm not sure if there are some more planned for this year. And I just particularly want to ask you about the tourism sector, where there's still a lot of reliance on people coming in from outside to work in the sector. And I know there are apprenticeships in that area. There are also some very good training programmes in that area. I'm very much aware of one in my own constituency in the LEDP, which is run through the ETV, which does an excellent job, a relatively short training programme, which gives young people really good opportunities to work. So I suppose, wanted to ask you about the growth of that whole area, because I think it really is very positive. And just Deputy Martin asked about the funding in the European Social Fund. Just there was a supplementary estimate because the figures were submitted in November for the ESF co-funding. So it's just a specific question on the figures. Was that money received? Was that funding received subsequently? At the end of the year, okay. Just clarification on that. And just, can that be more aligned in future with the budgetary process here, so that you don't have to go looking for a supplementary estimate? That's just another general question. And just finally, the NTF, the National Training Fund, increasing. There is some concern that business is going to have undue influence with regard to that fund, because it's going to be a greater contribution. And I mean, I'd be all in favour of the interaction between further and higher education and industry and opportunities, job opportunities, etc. But just, I think there is some concern that there might be over influence from, I suppose, the world of work as opposed to the world of education. So I don't know if you have a comment on that, or if you've had some kind of opinions expressed in that area. Thanks.
I'll just briefly add a question. Just in terms of the actual results on apprenticeships, there were in 2017 the department targeted 13 new apprenticeship programmes. The outturn was 11. The target last year reduced to 10, and the target this year is 35. So I think there's been very slow progress. If we make 35 extra programmes this year, it'll be fantastic. As the Minister, confidence that that will happen, despite coming from an extremely low base.
Okay. Thank you. Just to take Deputy Martin or Deuce somewhere. Yeah, female participation, and you're pointing to the positive in terms of the uptake and asked why is this happening. But I think we have to be in the realistic space as well, that we've a lot more to do there, and even just like a number of reports have highlighted that a number of women employed in craft apprenticeships is still low, reflecting the traditionally low levels of female employment in the craft sector. And that is an area that I've had preliminary discussions with a number of officials within Solace, that sometimes in life the things that are staring us straight in the face are the things that we maybe take for granted. And if I think of my own county, the traditional craft sector is something now that Solace in my own county are looking at and what they can do in relation to apprenticeship. And certainly, while Solace offers a bursary to craft employers to encourage them to employ female apprentices, the uptake by women is still very low. But just for a few more stats, at the end of 2018, there were 341 female apprentices registered, more than double the 2017 figure of 151. So that's the positive that you've alluded to. While this is welcome, it is also important to address issues influencing the low level of recruitment of women in the craft sector. Solace has completed a review on the pathways to participation in apprenticeship for underrepresented groups, including women. Areas highlighted for action include setting targets for female participation, considering extending the craft employer bursary to other apprenticeships which have less than 20% female participation, and a specific focus on female participation as part of the Generation Apprenticeship National Promotional Campaign. And I also just want to finally say women now feature prominently in all aspects of the National Promotional Campaign, where there is a specific focus on encouraging women and girls to consider apprenticeships as a means of launching or developing their careers. And I know we will be doing the career guidance review in the next number of weeks, and I know you've made a number of suggestions through this committee in relation to career guidance. I think we have a body of work on how we can support career guidance teachers more in terms of the information that they have, and to understand that the information at Junior Cert, at Leaving Cert, is critical, whether it's looking at different industries, whether it's apprenticeship, whether it's a higher diploma, whether it's a HEA, whether it's a higher education. So we have to look at the whole information vacuum at times that can be there, and that's not down to a fault on the career guidance teachers, because you could have one career guidance teacher for a whole school and they're not going to be able to develop individual career paths for every student, but how we make that information more accessible to the student cohort. I'm aware they do something very collaborative in Limerick, where they bring together Deputy O'Sullivan might be able to shed a wee bit more light on that. I only found out about it from a trip to Limerick, where they bring together the third level institutions, they bring together all the ETBs, SOLAs, all the different stakeholders and the young people into a single environment once a year. That type of information sharing is so important. The Future Skills Forum, I think, is contributing, to answer your question, Deputy Martin, contributing to this dissemination of information as well, and it's done at a regional basis, which is critical. And yesterday, while I was in Drumshanbo, I came across 2 more potential apprenticeships in Drumshanbo, one in the whole area of beauty and healthcare, and the other in organic farming, and they really are tapping into the possibilities around tourism as well that Deputy Sullivan mentioned. National Training Fund and the human capital issue you raised, Deputy Martin. From January 2020, a new ring-fence funding line, the Human Capital Initiative, will be established within the National Training Fund to invest €60 million per annum from the accumulated surplus over a 5-year period. This ring-fence allocation, totalling €300 million over the period 2020 to 24, will form a key part of the strategic response to Brexit and other challenges. And Deputy McLoughlin mentioned the apprenticeships and funding for apprenticeships, and just to acknowledge again the role that the likes of all the different providers and service providers that they're doing in this area, and the funding for 2019 budget allocation for apprenticeship training is €142 million, which represents an increase of over 16% on the 2018 allocation of €122 million. And the 2019 allocation is a portion between SOLAS, €105 million, and HEA, €37 million, and will support an apprenticeship population which is forecast to be in excess of 18,000 by the end of 2019, and new registrations that are forecast to be in excess of 7,000 in 2019. A recent study which appeared in the Irish Times showing that multinational companies hold an equal appreciation the graduate coming from higher level institutions and universities as they do graduates coming from apprenticeships, and we have to ensure that we continue to message that to young people, where the race for points and the race to university is not always going to be the perfect fit for all students. So it's important that the great work that's going on in relation to promoting apprenticeships is taken in centre to the conversation. The European Social Fund, Deputy Sullivan mentioned about the money. That money came towards the end of the year, and I remember at the time it was to do by the nature of some of the programmes and the Youth Reach programmes that they didn't have the applications in time. But look, I did raise it with my officials, and there will be an effort to try to ensure that we're in and we're not waiting on a supplementary estimate. And I think Deputy Byrne, go back, I think it was a question that wasn't answered in relation to the pensions issue. I think it was way back in a different one. But in relation to the pensions issue, it's not a case that the information wasn't estimated for, because there's a lot of work that goes into how many people will retire and how many teachers will retire. The short answer to that question is that there wasn't money put aside in the estimates. But now we have a baseline, because of the supplementary estimate of 144 million. This year, for the first time, the new baseline is 1.35 billion. So that's going to be the baseline. So I'm confident, to answer your question, which was answered before, I'm confident that we're going to be in a position this year because we have a new baseline. And the reality is, and whether my three predecessors since 2011, the three previous Ministers for Education, it wasn't a case that they didn't evaluate properly the number of pensioners who were going to retire. It's basically the finances weren't there and the resources weren't estimated within DPER because the money wasn't there. So that's why we had to go back every time and get supplementary estimates. But 1.35 billion is our new baseline.
Can I just ask you, Minister, just on that?
It was been very kind. I could have deliberately not answered.
No, it was on my mind. But what you're sort of saying there is that you knew how many would be retiring, but the department didn't estimate for it.
No, the department estimated, yeah.
No, but sorry, they didn't in the estimates. If that had come forward in supplementary estimates, you said they knew what they were doing.
Well, the department have to have a conversation with DPER to get sanctioned by DPER. So
DPER only sanctioned for less than what the department was thinking.
It wasn't a case of sanction for less. It was a case of what available resources were available within the constraints of what you could spend under current funding. And if you look at it, wasn't just within this department here, it was Department of Defence as well, had a similar issue. But the good news is that 1.35 billion is going to be the baseline for
the only thing I'd say about your answer there, Minister, is that previously the reason given was that there were additional unanticipated retirees. So what you're giving us a slightly different story now, that in fact you did anticipate them, but the money wasn't there for them.
Yeah, well,
I'll leave that there if you want.
Yeah, well, the information that I had then obviously was explaining the rationale behind looking for 144 million in a supplementary estimate. And what we have here now is a commitment because of the baseline. Obviously, this is a decision that has been taken, and as a result of that, the baseline now will be 144 billion, which I'm confident will have us in a bit better place.
There's a lot of money. I'll move on to third level if
the last.
Sorry,
the last question Deputy O'Sullivan mentioned was in relation to further education and industry. Yes, there's a lot of collaboration going on between industry now, cross-sectoral, and we're promoting that as well within the department, and whether it's IBM or Microsoft working with secondary schools in this sector, or whether it's a Limerick in your own constituency. And I'm hearing all great things about the regional approach, and Limerick University is not seeing itself as a university for Limerick, it's a university for the region, and they're looking at how they can try to get more Limerick young people into their university as well from the city. The LIT as well, and the collaboration. There's a great hunger for collaboration. And I was in Troy Studios as well last Friday, and they're looking at
auditioning, Minister.
No, I didn't get the call up, or I didn't get a follow-up phone call. But you know, they're looking at the whole apprenticeship, and really exciting stuff. And one of the biggest fascinating thing was about it that scaffolders that have been doing scaffolding all their lives, they need precision scaffolders within the film industry. They need skilled, experienced people for the lighting sector. So they're bringing in sparkies, or to use a slang word, or electricians to see can they train them up, and looking at apprenticeships for younger people in that area as well. So it's a great model. The world of work and education is separate entities. In terms of definition, there is a linkage there, obviously, but I agree with you. We still have to protect the philosophy of education within that, and it's something that I'm conscious of as well.
Okay. Move on to third level, programme C. Okay, have you any words to say on programme C, Minister?
I have one paragraph here, Chairman. I might as well get it off my chest. I think I even went halfway through the paragraph. No, just a figure there. Department's allocation. No, I think we're all done. Yeah, no, sorry, I covered it there.
Oh, you covered it. Okay, no problem.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I'll just ask two questions. The estimate at estimate C4 in terms of the general current grants to universities, IOTs and other designated institutions appears to be subject to a €15.5 million cut from 2018 to 2019. And obviously, can you explain that, Minister, particularly in terms of the ever-increasing number of students? They're projected to go from 159,000 to 162,313 in terms of full-time undergraduates, and there are similar increases of postgraduates as well. And also as well at head C11, student support, SUSI grants effectively, there's projected to be a cut from 406,877,000 to 404 million and a half. And can the Minister explain that, please? The next question then is Deputy Catherine Martin.
Thank you. In relation to, we see a scenario where the amount spent in higher level education just isn't enough to sustain the sector, and it's reaching crisis point. The state is currently spending just over half what it did in 2008 on each full-time student equivalent. We're only 2 years out from the Castle Report's first major benchmark in 2021, which is the requirement of an additional 600 million in annual spending for 2015 to 2021 to bring the overall spending in the sector to 2.4 billion. But, and just to say, we're still waiting the economic analysis on the report. So I'm just wondering, what are your plans to deal with the impending funding gap that many institutions are already feeling and is only going to get worse until action is taken? In relation to capital expenditure under this head C16, there's a significant increase in funding allocation, more than 200% over the last year, which is welcome. Which projects will this be for? Can you elaborate on this allocation? And in the quality budgeting objectives for the Athena Swan Awards, what percentage is that of all state-funded third-level institutes? And how many or what percentage applied, and what measures are being taken to promote the award? Again, in that section, the quality budget objectives, what is the percentage of school leavers who have disabilities? Is there a disparity in terms of overall percentage between those leaving school and those going on to third level? And what's the current percentage of women in senior academic roles? Thank you.
Deputy John O'Sullivan.
Thanks, Chair. Just to add to your own question on C4, can I just ask on C5, which is a similar issue, but it's to do with the Church of Ireland College of Education and the Marino Institute. Just again, why is that reduced? And on C11 and C13, which I just wanted to ask, obviously we interacted with you in relation to the Brexit bill and the education element of that, which involved the issue around student support, etc., which is in C11, and C13 is about north-south activities, etc. So just if you could maybe give us an update on those in relation to how a possible crash-out Brexit, and indeed any kind of Brexit, would affect those two subheadings, if you have any update on those.
Oh, sorry, Deputy Tony McLoughlin.
Just very quickly, Minister. Under C9, grants for certain third-level institutions, perhaps maybe you might just elaborate as to why these colleges or these institutions, for what purpose are they prioritised? And secondly, in relation to research activities under C12, perhaps you might, I see there's quite a large increase there, and I'd just like to, perhaps maybe you might elaborate on that. And also, finally, just in relation to the C16, the third level infrastructure, for capital investment programmes, that's to be certainly very welcomed, but also just the time frame, perhaps maybe in relation to the allocation of funding and what institutions or what areas will be benefiting as a result of this. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Kathleen Funchion.
Yeah, just I wanted to ask about the reduction in the SUSI under C11, and just to very briefly make or ask the question, which I know is not directly related to the estimates, but in relation to SUSI, is there any plans to look at that 45-kilometre rule that they have, particularly in rural areas where there's no public transport and people maybe have to try finance a car, or else in certain areas, which happens a lot in our constituency, where they're taking 2 buses and there's quite considerable cost, and they might be, according to the SUSI rules, over by 0.5 of a kilometre. Is there any plans to look at that? Thanks, Minister.
Can I just say, Minister, just nobody has raised the National Training Fund, and I think we might deal with that it's kind of off balance sheet slightly, so we'll deal with that after this round of questions, if that's okay. Yeah, which is on page 106. Anyway.
Do we not do some of that in B now?
We did it. Did we do it? Are we considering it? Yeah, anyway, I've other questions on it. But, yeah. I've other questions as well about non-estimates matters as well. The Children's Hospital, 10 million. Anyway, go ahead, Minister.
Thanks, Chairman. First of all, there's no cuts, right? You raised 2 issues there, Chairman, and you talk about the IOTs and third level. What's happened is actually to do the National Training Fund, the 60 million was that is money that is there now for the National Training Fund. So that's obviously well, I'm explaining to you that it's not a reduction.
The amount that the department gives is being cut because there's more coming in from the National Training Fund.
Well, it's not a cut. Like,
that wasn't the idea. Now, when we supported the anyway, I think you've been very open about it, but that was not the idea.
Look, being upfront and honest here, that's where that's a recalibration, or
it's a cut.
It's
a cut of 15.5 million.
We'll agree to differ in that one.
It's 15.5 million that your department is paying less to third level colleges because the National Training Fund has been increased, when in fact the purpose of that was to provide extra funding, not to replace departmental funding.
Yeah, but it's a department allocation. So it's a SUSI grant, your second one. There's been no change to the thresholds, no reduction in SUSI grants, obviously a reduction in participation, and that's what's accounting for that change.
Is that because the rules are so hard to qualify now, though?
Pardon?
Is that because it's so difficult sometimes to qualify for a SUSI grant?
Well, the thresholds haven't changed, but obviously, with more participation in the labour force, more people are, have an income, and obviously that, whether it's a single parent or a couple both working, I think that is going to affect it. Yeah, I mean that'll be my reasoning behind it. Deputy Martin had a number of questions around percentage of school leavers with a disability who go to higher ed and do schemes are available to support. Their schemes are available to support students with disability access. It's one of the conversations I had with the president of Limerick University. It's an ongoing conversation I had with presidents and IOTs in Galway and Sligo and Letterkenny recently as well. How we can get better in terms of the access bit and the percentage of school leavers. That figure, I'll get that figure for you, Deputy. But I know there's still a challenge there. Yeah. There's a massive challenge, whether it's vulnerable sectors or whether it's getting people with a disability, the travelling community, and we're looking at seeing ways and better ways of making that access, and it's obviously one of my foci in terms of my plans in this job. But if there's ways where we can make it easier for somebody with a disability, I met a professor recently who was saying that a lot of research has gone into this, but it could be simple things such as environment and physical accessibility to buildings. We have to keep that first and foremost. Percentage of women in senior academic roles. We have Minister Mitchell O'Connor has been a very strong advocate in calling out this issue. There's a big deficit, but she has introduced it will be mandatory for all higher education authorities for research funding, and I can revert with the exact details of the number of women involved. But one thing that we need to do is, number one, create the awareness, and secondly, do something about it. And obviously, Minister Mitchell O'Connor has been campaigning on that. You also mentioned third level funding, and one of the issues to do with how do we future fund and future proof universities and higher level education. I was at an event last Thursday morning in Grangegorman, in the new TUI Dublin Grangegorman campus. We brought all the stakeholders together, all the different leaders in the third level sector, And I specifically put down an issue on funding for them to grapple with the suggestions and see how we collaboratively look at that. Look, there has been an increase in funding, there's been an increase in capital funding, there's future increases in capital funding, but whether you're in Ireland or whether you're in Edinburgh University in Scotland or whether you're in any other university in the world, there is a constant debate around future third-level funding. Minister Mitchell O'Connor keeps me abreast of what's happening with the Castle's report. It's in Europe at the moment, and whenever we're in a position to have any follow-up on that, I'd be happy to do so. You also...
To Athena Swan.
Yeah, just go and you just come back to the reallocation of NTF funding for of FET of employment programmes below NFQ level 5 to the Exchequer. This process begun in budget 2018 has been accelerated in budget 2019. €57 million in investment in programmes with significant activity below level 5 in the NFQ, previously resourced from the NTF, will now be funded from the Exchequer, and the NTF should be deployed to support close to labour market skills programmes in areas of identified skill needs. Support for enterprise focused higher education programmes has been increased from €37 million in 2018 to €120 million in 2019. This investment will be made in areas with identified skills needs as outlined in the National Skills Bulletin and in line with priorities established by the National Skills Council. As was the case in budget 2018, the NTF will fund all of some programmes as part of this investment. Just wanted to bring clarification on that. You mentioned, Deputy, I didn't pick up promotion of which award.
Athena Swan, it says there, is that the one you're referring to? It says 8 state-funded institutions achieved Athena Swan, but I'm just remembering, I just want to know, what does that 8 stand for percentage-wise of all state-funded institutions?
Okay, I can get back to you with that specific.
And what are you doing to promote it?
Yeah, well, look, as I said, Minister Mitchell O'Connor has responsibility for this area. She's been very proactive in ensuring that she calls out the weaknesses in terms of the gender gaps there. So, look, I'd be happy to come back with specific information on that.
And actually, sorry, Minister, I meant to thank you for getting back to me. I got the answers to the questions that you didn't get to answer the last time committee. So thank you. I appreciate the follow through on that. No problem, Deputy. Deputy Janice Sullivan, in relation to the Church of Ireland and Marino, I'll have to get back to you on that specific one. Because
it was kind of an addition to the Chairman's question about the one before. Yeah,
let me get you information on that. And you also referenced once again the Brexit bill and where we're at in terms of what might happen and a crash-out Brexit. Look, we're preparing for the worst-case scenario, and we're hoping that sanity will prevail over the next couple of weeks in terms of some form of a pathway or solution to the fears around a crash-out Brexit. But look, we're going to continue to just prepare. All we can do is control the areas within the omnibus bill that we can control, and the only piece of legislation is in relation to the support, the student support, whether it's Irish Republic of Ireland students going to the north or going to Britain or vice versa, and we'll continue to remain vigilant on that bit. And Deputy McLoughlin, in relation to C12 and C16, just hold on a second, Deputy. Just can your specific question, Deputy, around C16?
Actually, no, just time frame, Minister, if that's possible, for allocation of funding for, say, capital investment programmes for this year. You may not have.
Yeah, well, look, there's a number of different avenues. I mean, there's a big programme of works now, and there's preparatory work going on in relation to the PPP projects for the IoTs. There's a call out now for capital funding for the higher education sector. The closing date for that is the 21st of March. And I know in your own constituency you have St Angela's there that we met with recently as well, who are very, very anxious to ensure that they get a fair hearing with respect to their demands as well. But I do know that a lot of the higher education authorities are working hand in glove to be part of part of a successful outcome for the universities. I was in Limerick last Friday, the new engineering campus and LIT. It's a very, very impressive and a very comprehensive project, but I know universities, to meet the needs of changing demands and a changing environment, that they need the funding and the capital funding to back that up.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chairman.
Yeah, that you finish, Minister, on that?
Yep.
Can I just go back to the National Training Fund and the third level funding? I mean, it just seems to me that you've taken the opportunity to cut third level funding from the general exchequer. I mean, that's unprecedented, actually, in the last number of years since the economy started to turn, and just simply replace it with the National Training Fund levy, which, you know, if you read is one of the recommendations of the Castle's report as a recommendation to try to get extra funding into the third level sector and into training. I don't think it was ever envisaged that the increase in the National Training Fund, which is a significant imposition that we've asked employers to take on, and we supported this, but I don't think employers ever thought that they would be replacing funding for third level. I think they thought they would be giving extra funding for third level, which is badly needed. But instead, what's happened is there's a £15.5 million cut in third level funding, Minister.
Yeah, well, you'll be aware that the Hildegarde report made the recommendation. It was an independent report to do this, and we have to have a system, a robust system that is fit for purpose. And certainly, if we're serious about trying to get employers into the centre in relation to potential solutions, we have to look at the different recommendations. I don't see it's not a cut. It's a more focused and a more targeted way of delivering schemes.
Well, all I know is that there was £1 billion and £7 million put into third level institutions from your department in 2018 estimated, and for 2019 you're proposing under £1 billion, 991 million, 926. So that's a cut. A cut is a cut is a cut. You've taken off the employers and said, that's grand, we don't have to pay that. To me, that is just, it's, I think, breaching the trust that employers have placed in the department by, let's be fair to them, not really objecting to this extra levy that they have to pay on behalf of their employees.
Look, if you look at the report, the Hildegarde report is an independent report. They made a recommendation, and this is
to increase. But Hildegarde never recommended that the department would cut its share of funding to third level, or take this opportunity to cut its share of funding to third level.
Well,
I don't think Hildegarde ever recommended that.
Well, look, I think we're going to agree to differ on the retargeting and the refocusing of this money, and certainly I don't see it as a cut.
Can I, if there's no other question on third level, I might just move on just briefly to the National Training Fund, just in terms of the estimate of income and expenditure, and also I want to ask about the National Children's Hospital as well, which we're the only department for which a supplementary estimate isn't required. So I think it's only fair that we would ask you about that particular transaction at this meeting. But the question I have, again, and employers have been asked to contribute to the National Training Fund at an increased rate this year and next year and last year. But what I see there is that the deficit for 2019 is projected to increase from the surplus, I should say, is projected to increase from 143.5 million to 258 million. Now, can you explain that to employers out there as to why there is a huge amount of money that they're contributing not being spent and being carried forward into what is now a substantial balance on that particular account? In fact, there's so much money there, you're actually getting bank interest on it and paying actually substantially more bank charges to keep the money there. But there's a lot of banking fees and banking interest there as well. But they're paying a lot more money. You're paying less, as I said, as I maintain, and not all of it is being spent. And then can I also ask for the National Children's Hospital, which is not part of this estimate, but as I say, we're the only committee that is not being given the opportunity to consider that. You're prepaying 10 million. What contract are you prepaying that €10 million under when you're giving that over to the Department of Health? And what authority have you to pay €10 million to the Department of Health? Or what obligation have you to do that? Okay. Any other questions? No, before the Minister answers. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Just to In relation to the National Training Forum, just to be clear also that it does not form part of the vote of the Department of Education. We established that. The allocation for each scheme is determined as part of the annual estimates process. The NTF is included as an annex to the published estimates of the Department, and such funding is included in the overall expenditure ceiling for Department of Education and Skills since 2011. This means that overall expenditure from the fund cannot be increased, even where receipts increase, without a corresponding drop in voted expenditure. The surplus remains available for investment in education and training programmes to meet skill needs. And prior to 2012, income from the National Training Fund levy had fallen from a high of £413 million in 2008 to £299 million. However, since 2012, receipts from the NTF levy have increased annually due to improved employment levels. The accumulated surplus in the fund has been critical in maintaining expenditure levels, particularly in the provision of training for the unemployed in a period when receipts were falling. And it is considered prudent to continue to maintain an adequate surplus in the fund to meet demand in future years. And while the surplus represents a very significant sum, it would only cover 7 months' NTF expenditure at current levels. So the surplus remains available for investment in education and training programmes to meet skill needs. I can just say as well, in relation to the reform of the National Training Fund, which I alluded to earlier, and also looking at the independent report, the Government announced increases to the NTF level by 0.1% in 18 to 0.8% and by a further 0.1% in both 19 and 20 in order to fund investment in education and training relevant to the skills needs of the economy. And the Government is committed to reform of the fund to ensure that it continues to be responsive to the world of work. And can I also say, in relation to the National Children's Hospital you mentioned in relation to the 10 million, we have made a commitment. There has been an historical commitment to education within the Children's Hospital of €17 million. What we have decided to do because of the to meet the needs of the overspend, we have this year allocated €10 million out of that 17 million towards that shortfall. And what it means effectively is when we are due, when it gets to the stage within the development of the hospital, to build the infrastructure around that training service provision, there will only be €7 million needed. So it's a front loading, and it's also to ensure that we are in keeping with the commitment, the historical commitment that we made.
And you don't think that commitment will be increased, or that the Department of Health and Public Expenditure will look for an increased commitment from you at any point in the next few years?
Not that I'm aware of. Now I know that we're not going to allow that 10 million to be offset, preventing other projects from going ahead, but we have ensured that that won't happen as well this year.
Any other questions? No. Thank you. That concludes our consideration, Minister, of the revised estimates for Vote 26 Education and Skills. In accordance with Standing Order 90, a message to that effect will be sent to the Clerk at the Dáil. I would now like to thank the Minister and his officials for their constructive and lengthy engagement at this meeting, and in fairness, I think answering pretty much all of the questions that the members put forward. We are now, I think, Deputy Martin suggested we go into private session, so we'll go into private session now. Okay.